Welcome to the Soch podcast.
Today I will get the chance to talk to Aman Bali from Kashmir and Jodh Singh from America about the ongoing Kisan protests in India. First of all, thank you to both of you for making the time to do this. If we could start with you perhaps introducing yourselves for those who aren't already following you on social media.
So, I am Aman, and I've been associated with this protest from day one. You can actually say from the very beginning, from June itself, when the ordinances were passed. So I'm basically not really a journalist. I'm an entrepreneur. I have my solar business in Mumbai, and I was in Delhi when the Jatha came on 26, 27, and thereon I decided to be with it. So I'm basically from Kashmir, and I have a lot of perspective of how things are for Sikhs in Kashmir, and I've been recording that. That's how most of people got to know about me. And I am an engineer by profession.
That's amazing. Just out of curiosity, are both of your parents as well from Kashmir?
Yeah. Just a little bit of context about it. Kashmir currently has around 80,000 Sikhs, and my parents live there. So most of the Kashmiri Sikhs still live in two places, Jammu and Kashmir. So it's sort of migration because they want to be on the safer side, just in case things mess up in Kashmir. So they also have reserve homes in Jammu area as well. So at the moment, they live in Kashmir. They work in government jobs there. So yeah, that's all about it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you were saying that you had been following these ordinances from the very beginning. Could you just give me a little bit of background and context? So when you say you've been following the ordinances, what is it in particular that you were following?
So if we look at the manifesto of BJP, when BJP came in power, so they have certain things in manifesto. It's not surprising to, that these bills just came all of a sudden. So these are very much included in the manifesto of the party, and they decided that we will implement Swaminathan report by bringing in certain ordinances and certain laws. So it was sort of planned, and it's very important to understand how things were in Punjab before all this happened. And when the ordinances were brought in June, there was already a lot of things going on in Punjab. Punjab was, Captain Amarinder Singh had announced he would set up, de-radicalization camps or UAPA. UAPA was really talked in Punjab in that time. And then there was a lot of other protests. There was education scholarship scandals going on in Punjab. So that was my curiosity on following Punjab. And when these ordinances actually came in, so another stir started in Punjab regarding these bills. So that's how I have the context of it from the very beginning.
Amazing. Okay, just before we delve into the questions into a little bit more detail, I'd just like to bring in Jodh Singh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Name is Jodh Singh, also Jung and Hung on various social media sites. That's my handle. I've studied as basically a engineer, just like Aman. I work as an engineer at a company. So I'm here on the East Coast of the United States, and I am so my connection to all this, what I mostly do on Twitter and Instagram is I just really, have an interest in, history, Sikh history, tradition, and current events. And, just post about stuff that's interesting to me, as well as, learn a lot from other people, especially from voices outside of, my little slice of the East Coast of the United States. So hearing from UK Sikh voices, hearing from Canadian Sikh voices, especially hearing from what there's a huge disconnect from is hearing from Indian Sikh voices. I get the voices from my parents who left Punjab in the late 90s, but having young Sikh voices of people who are living there today. I mean, my entire family lives in Punjab, but I'm not really in contact with them, and they're not really that into Sikhi. So it's nice to have be connected with other people across the globe and get an angle into what their side is. And especially for this whole Kisan protest movement, it's really nice to be able to network with people in India, see what's on the ground, and form my opinions based on that. So yeah, I won't be talking as much as Aman, but I'll just be, talking about some generic trends I've seen. And I've talked with Aman before about this, and we'll be talking, I guess, about some of the things we've seen in terms of maybe the propaganda we've seen, or also different narratives that proponents of the bills are using, and and so on. So
no, that's absolutely brilliant. I just wanted to pick up on 2 points that you mentioned. The first one was, I think you're completely right about connecting to Indian Sikh voices, because to be fair, until I joined Twitter, I had no connection with Indian Sikh voices. Aman and Punjab, I think, have been absolutely instrumental in ensuring the correct information is coming out from the ground. If there was like some type of Bunt award that we could give to these guys, I definitely think they should be nominated and put on the top of the list, because their seva is absolutely immense. Secondly, the other thing I just wanted to pick up on was, you'd mentioned that your parents had left Punjab in the late 90s. Was that in relation to the events that had unfolded during the 80s, or was that just kind of like of its own accord, so to speak?
No, so my parents left in the late 90s. So that's why.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, so that's why I mentioned that, because, I mean, 1995, right? That's kind of when everything, most of the stuff kind of comes to an end. So they basically grew up in the 70s. They saw everything that happened there. They grew up in the 80s. They saw everything that happened there. They grew up in the 90s. They saw what you could consider the, Khad Ki Lehr and all. They saw that and come to a close, and then they immigrated from India. So very different situation, I think, from a lot of diaspora people I know, where some people moved while that was happening, and also different situation because they were the only ones from their family to move. Like my entire family is in Punjab still. So, yeah.
No, okay, no. It's just always interesting to see how we've ended up wherever we have. So no, thank you for that. All right. Thank you both for obviously introducing yourselves. I definitely think you guys will do justice to the questions that we've got before us. So just starting off with number one. Well, to be fair, actually, I might just join the first two together because they kind of lead on to one another. The first one is, what has caused the last few weeks or months even of protests? What is the background to these protests? And what are the main issues with the bills?
So if we have to look at the unrest that we're seeing on the borders of Delhi right now, we really have to travel back to at least June. That's what most people are not, seeing it in that context too, just like why these protests abrupt. So these are not just abrupt. The reason these people from Punjab and Haryana actually came to sit on the borders of Delhi is because they wanted to increase their negotiation powers. We've been protesting in Punjab right from June, July, August, September. So sitting there on the toll plazas, on the railway tracks, and so it's been going on from really long time now. So coming back to why people are protesting and how it all started, you really have to look at the political context of it, and then obviously the bills. So I'll very quickly dive into what the bills are and how we actually decided to go against it and protest against these bills. So do you want me to go into the bills and explain those right away?
Yes, please. Well, I think you mentioned two things. You said there's the political context, and you also mentioned the bills. So before you go into the bills, if you could just provide a little snippet in relation to what you mean by the political context, and then explain the bills, I think the listeners would really appreciate that.
Right. So that is exactly why I mentioned the political context, because it's very important to understand that these protests are completely organic. These are ground level protests, grassroots protests. These are completely political parties are completely isolated from these protests. So that's what I mean when I talk about how these protests are completely isolated and there is no political connection to these protests. For example, if we look at what happened in June, July. So all the parties, whether it's Congress or when the bills were passed, when the ordinances were brought in June. So Captain Amrinder Singh, he himself. So this is how it happens. When the ordinances are brought in, all the chief ministers of the states, so they're told to come, and there's a meeting that's organized in Delhi or Mumbai, wherever it's discussed. So the ordinances are never cleared without discussions with the chief ministers of the states. So a commission of chief ministers of states was formed where Captain Amrinder Singh obviously sent Manpreet Badal, who is the finance minister for Punjab, and he at Niti Aayog actually approved these ordinances. So these ordinances were discussed in detail in Mumbai, and Manpreet Badal actually approved these ordinances. And if we look at Shromani Akali Dal's context and role in getting these ordinances passed into bills, so Shromani Akali Dal actually did not say anything against these ordinances when these were actually passed and were discussed in the houses. So all they said was, we want you to form a select committee and consult the farmers, because they themselves did not know at that time what are the flaws in the bills. So all they wanted was, which really has to be acknowledged, that they wanted the government to consult the people. So this is on record that they told the government that, hey, form the select committee, talk to the farmers. But other than that, they don't really have a role. If we consider another third party, political party, which is again Aam Aadmi Party from Punjab. So when the bills were passed, they actually went out of the house. They did not even vote in favor or against the bill. So they just went out of the house. When you leave the house, that means you are in the favor, because that obviously decreases the number of people voting. So in a way, they were all complicit in getting these ordinances passed into laws. So that's why there was a lot of political isolation of these parties from the protesters.
So just to go back to, you had mentioned that the Akali Dal essentially hadn't reviewed the ordinances. Is that because they hadn't bothered to do their due diligence, or just because they weren't given the ordinances?
So Akali Dal, if like all the listeners, if they're not aware, let me just tell you all. Akali Dal was in an alliance with, it's called the National NDA. So Akali Dal was in alliance with BJP, and they've been in alliance for a really long time now. So the alliance was forged by Prakash Singh Badal with Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and the party really enjoyed. It was like the second hand, right hand of BJP. Shiromani Akali Dal is considered really strong component of BJP. So if you are a part of the alliance, you really don't question the policies of your, parent party. So you do know that they're actually doing good, and we cannot really oppose them when we are in the alliance. So it's only after they split the alliance that they started talking against the bills. And if you look at all the protests and rallies that Shiromani Akali Dal organized, they're more or less the face-saving acts for 2022.
Okay, I understand. So they're almost trying to save their own skin by using this to gain support. Okay, understood. Fair point. Then in relation to the protests that are happening at the moment, then they, as you're saying, they are a people's movement, in that there is no political involvement, there is no kind of political party behind the protests in any way.
Yeah. So at the moment, there is really no political motivation, no political parties, because if anyone is following the activities of the protests and how these protests are happening, so these are not happening just in Delhi and on the borders of Delhi. Every day, protesters march out in Punjab. The ladies, women folk, they march out in Punjab. They go to DC offices. They sit outside on the petrol pumps. Any Congress leader, any BJP leader, any Shiromani Akali Dal leader, even for that example, they're not even let out into the rallies. They're surrounded. They're not really allowed to address people. Their rallies are, they're not able to, perform their activities really in Punjab. So in a way, people have realized that none of the political parties were actually working for them.
So would it be fair to say that this is a movement by the people for the people, and it doesn't involve anyone else whatsoever?
Yeah, to be really honest, yes, this movement is actually a really, really, really organic, and there's no involvement of any political party. That's why it's on till now, because it takes government a minute to sabotage a movement, to call it off, to discredit it by labeling it to some party. So the very fact that there's no party political involvement in it, that's the reason it's going on.
Okay, brilliant. This actually ties nicely into a question that was sent in. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because it relates nicely to what you've just mentioned. They had said, and again, I'm not quite sure if this is true or not, but they had mentioned that Yogendra Yadav was at the protests, and they were saying that if political parties aren't allowed, why was he?
So Yogendra Yadav, actually, he has a political party, which is Swaraj India. So this party, Yogendra Yadav, besides being a politician, his party, being a small party in Haryana, doesn't really get a lot of seats. So besides being a political leader of a small party, which is formed, as a separate entity, which has different ideologies compared to what BJP, Congress, and everybody has. So he's been spearheading a lot of activism. He's been part of CAA protests. He's been part of a lot of other protests. He's been raising farmers' concerns again and again. He's one of the go-to persons for agriculture in Haryana. So his involvement more or less is not political, because he's not carrying his political party's flag anywhere. If you notice, no party or no individual, no matter even if he's involved in any party, if he has his, allegiance to any party, is not allowed to carry his party flag or talk about his party. So Yogendra Yadav, in his capacity as a farmer, is a part of the protest at the moment.
Okay, understood. That makes a lot more sense, and I think that nicely answers the follower's question as well. Okay, just delving into the bills then, and I think again it will be a good opportunity for Jodh Singh to add to anything that you again offer. So let's break down these bills. What are the main issues with the bills? And again, like if we can make it as simple as possible, what are the issues with the bills mainly, and how do they affect the farmers?
Yeah, so it's very important to understand how things were going before these bills were passed, before these bills were made into the laws, and how things will change or have changed after these are passed. So before we go into context of other states and what's going to happen, it's very important to know what the bills are. So the first bill, which is FPTC, it's called as Farmers Produce, Trade and Commerce, Promotion and Facilitation Act. Then we have the second bill, which is Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement Act. And then the third one is Essential Commodities Amendment Act. So that's an amendment. Third one is not actually a bill that this government has brought in. It's amendment to Essential Commodities Act, which already existed. And in addition to this, there's two more ordinances that farmers are protesting against, which is one is the Air Quality Ordinance, and another one is about the Electricity Amendment Bill, which talks about the subsidies. So I'll go point-wise, talking about the bills and their issues, how they're bringing in the issues. The first bill, Farmers FPTC, that's talked as the main contentious bill, and most of the economists, even the right-wingers and other people who are really pro-government, they also acknowledge certain sort of failures in the FPTC Act. So the farmers' belief, I'll explain it with how things are going on before the bills and how things will happen now. So there's a mandi system, in Punjab and in agriculture in India, there's a mandi system where government procurement happens and government purchases. So the farmer just goes to mandi and puts his produce there, and it's taken by the person, and then there's a middleman involved. So what happens with this new FPTC Act and Farmers Produce Trade Commerce Act, it facilitates the private players, it brings in the private players who can actually put their stalls outside the mandi anywhere and take the produce from the farmer. Farmer can actually sell his produce to any private player. So the main concern the farmers are having with this bill is that over the long period of time, let's say 2 years, 1 year, 3 years, these private players in the beginning, they will offer us good prices. They will not, really be strict about the quality of the crop and whatnot. So we will be really suffering after, say, 3 years when these private players, when our government mandis, dissolve because of these private players. Because when the farmers stop going to the government mandis because of these private players, so the mandis will actually dissolve. And that's a bigger concern for everyone, because what happens is we generate certain fund from mandis, which is also used for development of the rural areas and the network. If you look at Punjab, for example, there is a network of around 540 mandis. It's really on the record. You can just go to the website of Punjab Mandi, and you can see 540 mandis. These mandis are well connected. Then there is infrastructure of roads and electricity, and everything is, the rural areas really developed because of these mandis. So once it happens, it's really important to understand what happened with the Geo network that came in India. So really cheap network. At first, the pricing was really cheap. People got used to it. Everyone shifted to it. The other networks, the private networks which were established, they started suffering losses. And then this Geo network again started to be one of those, it changed its pricing terms and everything.
One thing is for Geo Network is the cellular service for those in America and UK listening in. That's their Indian cellular. It's like the equivalent of AT&T or Verizon here.
Oh, I see. I was wondering what Aman Sai was talking about. So just going back to that, are you saying that the Geo Network started off as kind of like a government-backed network, super cheap, got everyone on board, took the market out for the private players, But then once they realized they had everyone, they obviously knew they could monopolize the market, and so switched prices to like something extortionate.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really a good way to put it. But that's the farmers fare again with the mandis. They're fearing that the government mandis, which is the current center for the farmers sell their produce, they're fearing that government mandis will go obsolete one day, and the private players will actually dissolve all of it. So that's the concern with the first bill, and that's a really legit concern. Most farmers think that is important concern. And then there are certain clauses. If we go on to the second bill, which is empowerment and protection, which includes the contract farming as well. So a lot of people do not know that farmers are already doing contract farming. This has been going on. Even Punjab has it implemented, and this argument is put forward by a lot of people. Hey, but you guys are already doing contract farming. What changed now? What happens now? So It's really important to understand that the clauses that this bill puts in are different. It changes the structure of contract farming. So there's something called as dispute resolution, which has become an important point of talking in contract farming. Dispute resolution is very important for a farmer's perspective, because it's a contract with a farmer and a private player. So when I'm engaging in contract farming, I'm entering into a contract with a private player. And in case of dispute resolution, I got to have my rights of jurisdiction. The farmers are demanding that we need the jurisdiction to be limited to courts. We want to go to courts just in case there's some disagreement or the contract violation. But what happens in this Contract Farming Act, government tells you that you can go to an SDM level. SDM would be an officer who is, again, a government officer of the ruling party. So this is the point of contention where farmers are like, well, SDM level is not really happy. We're not happy with the SDM level of jurisdiction on our contracts with the farmers. Another important point in this contract farming would be that the crop quality everything is given by the sponsor on the crop. For example, I'm a farmer and I'm growing the produce. So if I'm in a contract with you, you will be the one who will actually sponsor everything. But at the end of the contract, it's written that you're not responsible for the quality or anything like that. Right? For example, so the farmer is really concerned because there's rains, there's pests, there could be anything that can damage the crop. So at the end of it all, he is responsible for it. The sponsor or the contracting company is not responsible at all.
Sorry, just to kind of summarize what you're saying, are you saying that the fundamental change in the contract farming that exists is that the new structure that these ordinances put forward is one where the farmer is taking on the responsibility for the quality of the produce?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only the quality of produce, I'll just go a little more into details of it. So if there's the concept of sharecropping. So according to this new contract bill, in sharecropping is never held responsible for anything. For sharecropper is someone who crops with me. For example, I give my land to someone to just he brings his crop and then he produces on my land. But in this form of contract, sharecropper is also held responsible. So this is another point that people are talking about. And there are concerns of land grabbing and how this bill is affecting the land, which is really important. Even someone like Deep Sidhu was, in one of the videos that went viral, he was really arguing with the policeman, you're grabbing our lands. And everyone was like, how is this bill even grabbing lands? This is not a land grab bill, or this is not a land revenue bill or anything like that. So to make it really clear, this bill is not really on the outset of it, it's not really grabbing your lands. You really have to study it in detail to understand how lands will be grabbed.
But it'd be grabbed because of mortgaging the property in order to support funding the farm, though. And if you can't then pay, the farmer's going to take if you can't pay or you can't kind of provide the produce at the end of the contract, then the private company is just going to take the land, surely. Because if you can't provide the produce, they need something.
Yeah. So this bill actually, and even the government clarified in the later stages that that's not going to happen, because we're not talking about the land grab, and we are ready to implement it and amend it, So this is the recent proposal that government has posed, that we're ready to amend it and put it like this, that there will be no land grabbing and it will be only based on land revenue. But it still doesn't answer one thing, that what if the private company, which I have lended my land to or I've entered into contract with, what about the structures that company will put on my land? For example, I'm in contract with, let's say, Jodh Singh, and Jodh Singh decides to put a structure there, for procurement, for storage, or for processing or whatnot. So what happens if Jodh Singh decides to take a loan on that structure? If Jodh Singh is putting a processing unit on my land, on my farm, and Jodh Singh decides to take a loan against that structure, for that structure, based on my land. So what happens to that if Jodh Singh is not paying that and going off? I don't know Jodh Singh after 1 year. What happens to the loan? Well, the government technically has to take my land. So that's the concern that's not addressed in the bill.
I see, and that's why then people are suggesting it's a potential land grab bill.
Yeah, very true.
I think that's also Aman. Is this where the civil court redress comes in as well?
Yeah. So all the concerns are addressed to SDM, which is not the court level. It's a magistrate level officer, but again, it's a puppet of the government officer. So people want it to be given to courts, and government's argument in this is that our courts are already burdened with the cases, and it is unlikely that the courts will be able to solve the issues. So government's argument is that we're trying to make it easier for the farmers to get the resolution done in shorter period of time.
Yeah, but I think this is one thing that people are bringing up in terms of, and maybe there's varying opinions in the Kisan unions, but this is, I mean, you're saying that, when it comes to these big conflicts, suddenly no longer it's a court decision, but it goes to magistrate level. And at the magistrate level, obviously, right, who has more of a, bargaining chip? It's going to be big corporate players, right? So that's another concern when it comes to like the fact that the form of legal redress farmers have is going to be limited. And so that's another concern that I think people have really brought up about how the courts are, how it changes the way farmers can address, legal concerns. And also just giving some historical backdrop, I want to point out in 1907, actually, this became a very big issue. This is probably one of the best historical analogies. It became a very big issue in the Pagadi Sambhal Jatta movement. This movement was led by Ajit Singh, Bhagat Singh's uncle, and Lala Lajpat Rai. It was it was a lot of farmers in North India, prominently based in Punjab. A lot of Sikh farmers as well. That's where this slogan comes in, Pagadi Sambhal Jatta. And it was over basically agrarian unrest that happened because basically they wanted protection for land from basically merchant players, which is pretty corporate. So this is that's 100 years ago. So this has been the system in place for 100 years. So this is has some historical analogy and analogs and all that. I just want to point out. So.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. So in relation to those bills then, you've gone over the first two, and then in relation to the third one, is there anything in particular which you wish to highlight? Yeah.
So we also missed one more thing, that the registration. So the government claims with these bills that we will actually, dissolve middlemen. So it's very important to understand who is the middleman. So a lot of people have been arguing this is the movement of the middlemen. This is the movement of the rich farmers of Punjab. So everything is targeted around middlemen, but government claims that with these bills, we are going to dissolve middlemen. So, but the truth is very, very far from what's actually happening on ground. So middleman is not someone who's robbing farmers off. If you look at Rajawalji's interview on what a middleman is, even government is not willing to identify middleman as a farmer. So according to the definition of farmer, which the government of India actually lays out, so middleman is actually someone involved in the farmer's, whole cycle of transporting, whole cycle of processing food, whole cycle of selling food. He is actually someone who is involved in it, and he's actually a farmer. And the middleman in Punjab is different when we compare it to other states, where APMCs do not exist. For example, states like Bihar, there's no APMC. The definition of middleman there would be someone who comes to your door, comes to your village, and tells you, hey, so let me just take your produce for maybe 1,100 per quintal, but government is taking out 1,000. So let me just offer you 1,100, and he would make some money off there. But this is not the case in case of Punjab, because there's already established mandi system, and these people are not only responsible for taking and selling the produce of the farmers. These people are responsible for transporting the produce. All that I have to do as a farmer is to take my tractor trolley to the mandi, just sit there, drink a cup of coffee, cha, lassi, or whatever. And this middleman, he will have his labor. He will clean up my trolley. He will unload it. He will clean up. He will hand me out the cash right there. Or the next day. That's it. The immediate funding, immediate payment system. So in addition to this, if for some season my crop is not good, or I haven't grown it and I need money, it's my daughter's wedding, or it's I have an emergency, health emergency, I go to this middleman. I tell him, you take my produce every year. We know our families. You know my grandfather from like 10 years. So I need 50,000 right now, 50,000 Indian rupees. And he goes like, that's not a worry. I've been taking your produce for years. Well, maybe I'll adjust it in with the next produce. So he's not only someone who's taking money for his services. All the commission that he's taking it as for his services. He's not actually a middleman, as government claims. And he's actually an ADM for a farmer, which people do not understand. And what government is claiming with this bill, that we're going to dissolve these people, what actually is going to happen, that government is going to introduce new people. So the registration includes registration for trader is enabled by simple PAN card. So let me just tell you, Jodh Singh or Rambling Jew, both of you can come to India, apply for a PAN card and get it within 1 month. Both of you, and you can go to Punjab with that PAN card and tell the farmer, I'm going to enter into a contract with you. I'm going to buy your produce for this season with this PAN card. Do you know that's the only document required with the current bills? So you are introducing more middlemen because there's no due registration process for the middlemen. And there's farmers not going to chase someone based on PAN card.
So are you right? So is the issue with the middleman and this legislation actually the fact that the government wouldn't actually, obviously they'd be flooding the market with far more kind of middlemen, so to speak. But I think the thing that I can see most is that it would change kind of the socio-economic fabric of the local area, because if you're swapping out, so kind of your analogy of the farmer going to the middleman in the case of like a medical emergency and asking for 50 grand up front, that almost seems to kind of shout out that it plays like a role within kind of the social just fabric of that area. And I think if this middleman change is to happen, again, it would obviously detrimentally affect the market. But I think more importantly, it would change just kind of the local kind of setup.
So, or I think you're right there. So there's more details to it why government wants to do it. So there's a network of APMC mandis, which is the government mandis, and whenever government buys from these mandis, when the government of India is actually buying from these mandis, it has to pay tax. It's called as mandi tax. It's not actually a tax; it's a fee that government pays. And for Punjab, it's 8.5%, out of which some percentage is for RTIAs, So it's not the farmer who is paying the RTIA, it's the government who is paying the RTIA, this middleman we're talking here, So that's why the government is pissed off, that we don't want to really pay to these people. And once we get rid of these mandis, and another thing, very important thing that government has cleverly introduced in these bills is we're not going to tax the private players. So you see what they're doing. Because currently government is burdened with taxing, they're getting taxed on buying produce from the mandis that already exist. If government is buying produce from the already existing mandis, it's getting taxed heavily. 8% in Punjab is really heavy. And government wants to get done away with that. Government doesn't want to pay taxes because cleverly they've introduced the private players. We don't really have to pay to the private players, no tax. So in the amendments, government is suggesting we're willing to tax these private players as well. So you're right, it also disrupts the circle, the social fabric, because not only the middleman and the farmer relationship is affected, the labor-farmer-middleman relationship is also affected, because if farmers don't have money, if the RTIAs, middlemen don't have money, the laborers don't have money.
Understood. And I guess that's what you're providing, kind of the nitty-gritty detail, because like to me, the macro images is that it would affect the social fabric and the kind of the social economic functioning that the current system helps to support. And I think what you're brilliantly providing is the finer detail, which elaborates on it far better than I could. Okay, no, I think this is brilliant because even for someone like myself, I'm learning so much just having this conversation and going through it bit by bit. I have to obviously say thank you for the way you're breaking it down because it makes it far easier for everyone else. So they, as far as I can tell, they are the first two ordinances then that we've spoken about, and then you said there was a third one in relation to electricity.
Yeah. So the other two, that one of them is regarding the air quality and control management passed by NGT, that's National Green Tribunal, and another one is Electricity Amendment Act, which talks about reducing the subsidies that the farmers are getting on electricity and everything. So government is willing to amend those, and so those really aren't point of contention at the moment because even the farmers know that it will be done with, because there's this process that happens in India, and constitutionally this is accepted that once an ordinance doesn't turn into a law within 6 months, it's void. So that's what's going to happen with this electricity amendment ordinance, because it's been more than 6 months and it hasn't really turned into a law, and we don't really expect a session of parliament any sooner. So this is already void. And more or less, the sources have already confirmed that this is going to be void. So Stubble Burning Act, which is also roughly called stubble burning, that's actually Air Quality Management Act. So that makes rounds every October, November when people Punjab and Haryana and Uttar Pradesh burn stubble. So it talks about taxing, fining the farmers with like 1 crore. If you found burning stubble, you will be fined at least 1 crore and 5 years of imprisonment. In addition to that, you'll be blacklisted from taking any loans in agriculture, and you'll be, barred from using the government subsidized services, whatnot. So that's really a farmer killing sort of ordinance and act.
Okay, but from what you were saying, though, they are unlikely to become law.
Yeah, the electricity one is unlikely to become a law, but the stubble burning one, the government is willing to make amendments to it.
Okay, and there's no suggestion as to what those amendments might be at the moment then?
Oh, the government actually, after the meeting with Home Minister Amit Shah, government sent a detailed proposal of what government thinks amendments are, because now really a lot of rounds of talks have gone on with farmers, and government from its denial mode has come to an acceptance mode that, okay, let's agree that there are some flaws in the bills and we're willing to amend those, but not willing to repeal the laws. So government has sent a proposal where they are likely, and they're suggesting that we're willing to amend certain things that you suggest.
Okay, just then before moving on to some of the other questions, is there any feedback so far from the government in relation to the first few ordinances that we had gone through in relation to kind of farmers' produce, the changing of the middleman, etc.? Has there been any government suggestion that they're willing to amend it or do anything with it? Okay,
so it's really important to understand that we've already done with 5 rounds of meetings with the government. So the first meeting actually 14 October, then we had 30 November, then we had 1st December when the farmers came to Delhi, and then immediately after 1st December, we had another round of talks on 3rd December, and then one day after we had on 5th December. And that's when the talks, deadlocks always persisted. Farmers, initially the government was not even willing to accept that there's anything wrong with the bills. So what happened in one of the meetings when farmers were called to Delhi, I'm not sure most of our listeners would remember that. So farmer representatives were called to Delhi and they were insulted. They were shown PowerPoint presentations about how good the bills are, and no minister actually decided to sit in the meeting. So agriculture secretary showed the presentations to the farmers, and then farmers did a really courageous and bold step of walking out of that meeting in Delhi. And constantly, side by side, what government was doing was that it was promoting its bills in Punjab by its ministers, BJP Punjab, and they were constantly promoting these bills in Punjab while the farmers were talking in Delhi. So government was in a lot of denial mode. But what happened after 5th December meetings, government accepted that there are certain flaws in the bills, and we're willing to amend those. That was the talk what happened with Amit Shah, the Home Minister, and government decided that we're going to send you a proposal. The other day, a proposal was sent to the farm unions, which the farm unions rejected, and we're here waiting for the 6th round of talks.
Okay, brilliant. Just before moving on to the next question, Jodh Singh, is there anything that you wish to add?
I think I wanted Aman to speak a bit broadly about the bills, and I kind of wanted to give input in terms of, contextualizing it a bit for some of us who aren't as familiar with agriculture, as well as bringing up the topic of MSP. So specifically, I mean, so some of these things, right, they're very connected to people. Some of the people are, they're pointing out that this, the locus of these protests is most certainly Haryana and Punjab. There are some farmers from UP, Tamil Nadu, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra who are trying to come, but they're detained or stopped. But there is definitely a concentration of the farmers from Punjab and Haryana. And so it's been a large talking point, from the sort of BJP ecosystem saying, these states are pampered, all this. They've been given MSP. What is MSP, right? This is a huge issue. This is probably one of the biggest issues that came out initially. So put it short, right? The government, when they procure wheat and rice, which they've been doing since the 1950s in Punjab, because Punjab and Haryana were among the first. I mean, back then it was all just Punjab. They were among the first to have sort of implement green revolution, techniques, and that really increased the productivity per hectare in terms of farm output. And so because of that, basically the government, they needed farmers in those areas to grow lots of quantities of wheat and rice to basically feed India. Nehru was faced with the problem of India being on the verge of starvation. And so they started implementing this Essential Commodities Act, which basically made it so that there would be a minimum support price, basically a guaranteed price at which rice and wheat were sold, which would then, ensure that farmers grew that. For example, like people in Punjab do not eat rice, but so much rice is grown in Punjab because basically it's grown so that the government will buy it at MSP, and that MSP can then be used to distribute it elsewhere. So, and this MSP over time, it's become sort of an income guarantee. It's equivalent to subsidies given to farmers anywhere, right? Farming is actually in a pretty bad state in America. There's a lot of it's very corporate, big farmer dominated, but even here there are subsidies the government gives to farmers because food security is always a number one priority. And so there's one of the amendments, I forgot which one it is, it basically makes changes to the Essential Commodities Act. And the argument is, put it shortly, that this is basically the writing on the wall for MSP. So the government's been saying, we assure you MSP is going nowhere. Khattar, the chief minister of Haryana, gave this stupid kind of ultimatum saying, if MSP is, please don't protest. If MSP is gone, I will resign. He gave this verbal guarantee. And the problem is that you basically think about this minimum support price as a subsidy, a guaranteed subsidy. You have three narratives, right, that are coming in from, I guess, the BJP ecosystem, those who stalwarts to the bill. Narrative A is admitting, okay, you know what? These reforms in their entirety, yes, they do get rid of MSP. Yes, they do get rid of the Mandi system. Yes, they're highly disruptive towards the agricultural system in Punjab. And so they will harm Punjab and Haryana especially. And it's good because, Punjab and Haryana need to industrialize, rice paddy is bad for growing rice paddy is bad for the environment anyways, all these things, right? That's narrative A. It basically admitting that the bills will disrupt a large thing in the status quo, and admitting that it's going to cause some pain to farmers. There's narrative B, which is basically saying that nothing changes. Basically MSP is going to be guaranteed. The Mandis are, it's not going to be dismantled. It's just that there's more options. So farmer incomes across India can only go up, which means even Punjab and Haryana, they can only go up. So this narrative, people are saying, the farmers are just, they don't know what they're reading. These Punjab and Haryana farmers, they don't know what they're, protesting for. They don't know what they're pushing for. They've just been misled by opposition parties. This will actually help them out. The third narrative, in narrative C, we can say, is that, this is going to help other farmers in India who don't benefit as much from MSP procurement, like UP, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, but it'll sort of hurt the farmers in Punjab and Haryana who have been benefiting from MSP and this agricultural system. So And to kind of add like flourishes on that, a lot of these people, they started like churning out. If you follow Sial Mirza Guraya on Twitter, he's just been responding to people who have been kind of pushing this narrative, which is very much, honestly, it's very much, I would say it has become a toxically anti-Punjab narrative, basically saying, oh, Punjab is pampered with this MSP, Punjab, it's not even producing that much, like, the other farmers of India, give them their due, all this stuff. So in my mind, so this is something that's really funny, right? Because you have people, like someone in my mentions yesterday comes spamming me with the link to an essay of an economist who argues the first, right? That, yeah, this is going to take away MSP. This is going to take away the agricultural laws that have basically, guaranteed good news for Punjab up to this point. And it's going to cause them short-term pain. He puts this simultaneously, and he also tells me simultaneously that MSP is going nowhere. And he's like, see, this is why farmers are stupid and uneducated. And it's like, you cannot argue. Like, it's really funny because one of the things I think from a social cultural perspective that's really sparked this unrest is the constant denial of the government and its stalwart to admit that, there might be flaws with the bill, or that, God forbid, farmers might, just like any other player in a political system, be interested in their own economic self-interest. So you have like this guy's spamming me both of these narratives. A, MSP isn't going anywhere, but also sending me a link to an economist who's saying, MSP will go away. These three narratives they're mutually exclusive. You cannot have, like, you have to stick to one, right? Either you admit what's going on, you admit that, and that's why I personally, like I've discussed with Aman, I personally do think this is the writing on the wall. The intent of this, it is the writing on the wall for MSP. So suddenly, like when you keep these three narratives in mind, again, narrative A, MSP is going away. We admit it. Whatever. We want India to industrialize and move away from farming anyways. Narrative B, Punjab and Haryana farmers are pampered. This will equalize farming in India. Narrative C. Narrative B, farmer incomes everywhere across India, including Punjab and Haryana, can only go up. People are just misread about the bill. You will see people who like cite themselves as, experts compared to the dumb farmers. They will be saying all 3 points simultaneously, and you just cannot have that. And this is another problem which I think has inflamed the situation, beyond out of control, is that, the people who are stalwarts of the bill, they've been sending continuous mixed signals while questioning farmer intelligence, while questioning, genuine farmer motives. Like if it's let's say Farm Bill A, if it's the situation that's narrative A, then farmers very much have a right to be upset. And like even if your intent is like Sadanand Dume in the Wall Street Journal, I mean, I disagree with him respectfully on this issue. His view is, India needs to industrialize. I'm like, okay, then why doesn't the Modi government just outright say that and, offer incentives for farmers to, let's say, industrialize? But they're not doing that. They're just saying, oh no, MSP isn't going anywhere. Trust me, this is good for you. Like farmers, they've been doing this for like, decades. They know what's good for them. And this is kind of just separate away from all this stuff that, Aman was talking about in terms of, what the corporate would allow corporate power to get in the way, what will allow sort of big corporations to come in and exert their control. This is just something for, I guess, us to keep in mind, because it's very important, I think, that we have a consistent narrative, especially when there is, I think, one issue that has really inflamed this is the fact that there's been so much demeaning rhetoric towards farmers, towards their intelligence, when in fact they probably are doing what's in their best interest, and they're either seeing through the guise of what government sort of propaganda is pushing, or they know what they're doing, and they know what will harm it. So
yeah, interestingly, there was a question sent in by a follower that I just want to put forward to both of you. It kind of ties in nicely to what you've just been talking about in regards to MSP. This individual actually kind of, I guess, is viewing a different alternative to what we've spoken about so far. So their question is, can the MSP model of Punjab be applied across the country through a federal legislation? Is that economically feasible? And if the centre agreed to such a thing via some type of federal law, would this result in a definite fall in MSP prices and therefore a reduced buying of crops by the government in Punjab?
Yeah, so Devinder Sharma has brought up this point. He's an economist he's always been an advocate of farmers, and his view is, instead of this view of, oh, Punjab and Haryana are pampered because they get more MSP, why don't we replicate those models in Punjab and Haryana, which are able to give farmers decent livings across India? And by the way, I was actually doing some research in 2017. One of the big things that actually, so UP's like agriculture productivity has been relatively going up. One of the big incentives the BJP gave was actually increasing the MSP regime in Uttar Pradesh. But speaking to the point, the question of can MSP, is it feasible to be expanded at that nationwide level? Well, I mean, there are some economists who believe that. I think there are a lot of people who are like, okay, we can't subsidize so many farmers, that kind of becomes like a moral argument. Like, okay, who do you value in terms of, civilization? Do you want to value farmers more? Do you want to value, corporates more? The question of whether it would make MSP prices go down if they increase procurement of it. I mean, the other reason to keep in mind, one of the reasons why Punjab gets so much of its rice and wheat procured is if you look at the raw output of, Punjab and Haryana, someone put out the graphs, it's like there's, relatively Punjab and Haryana produce very little wheat and rice compared to like Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. If you look at the output per hectare, and the output of population, that number is like completely warped, right? Like it's like Punjab and Haryana are suddenly twice as much productive. And so, you would need to have because think about it, Uttar Pradesh, they have a population of 200 million. Punjab is a population of 23 million. So, MSP procurement is also done by farmers in Punjab because they produce a lot of surplus. And so expanding the MSP sort of regime, as you could say it, I think it would be a good idea. I don't really have any concrete views on this per se, but I will say that it is common, for example, for these farmers in UP and Bihar who are, again, supposedly benefiting from the new bills. They actually will come into Punjab most of what they farm, they're subsistence farmers, right? So they'll consume themselves, but when they need to sell it, they'll actually come to Punjab to sell it. This is very common. Ask my family in Punjab about it. Very, very common for this to happen. So I guess if that's institutionalized at a nationwide level, I wonder what the macro effect will be, but I also, that's not even on the table as of now, right? Again, as on the table as of now is basically they kind of want to scrap MSP as a whole, let alone expand it.
Yeah, this is almost like a complete opposite question, but I just thought it related to what we were discussing, so it was worth at least answering just for the kind of the sake of the question. Just before moving on into how the diaspora can help and how they can continue to help, just wanted to check if Aman had anything to add to that last question about if MSP was to be rolled out nationwide, what kind of impact would that have?
Yeah, so I think I'll put some technical details into what Jodh Singh said. So technically, it's not really possible to have uniform MSP all over the country because you need to really understand what MSP means. And there are a lot of factors in MSP that are not uniform all over the country. So MSP, what is MSP actually, and why was it introduced? A lot of people actually do not know. So MSP came really late. It came in 2006, 2004. Commission was set up. Swaminathan had it in 2006. It comes in. And had it been implemented since 2006, 2007, we'll look at that data later when we talk about it. But why is it not possible to implement uniform MSP all over the country? Because MSP is the cost of C2 plus 50%. That's the formula, that's the formula going on. Facebook, Twitter, everybody's talking about this formula. Give us MSP according to C2 plus 50%. What is it? What is C2 plus 50%? So I, as a farmer, I have certain costs, So there's certain variables in MSP formula that Swaminathan calculated. So the first variable is A2. A2 would be the cost of urea, pesticides, the cost of seeds, and everything. So that is one of the costs that Swaminathan takes into consideration. And then another variable that Swaminathan takes into account is A2 plus FL. which is family labor. He adds the family labor to it, And this is the discussion I had with CL yesterday. It's a really long podcast. We discussed it in detail, what MSP means. So the family labor, once added to it, it's A2 plus FL. But because I, as a farmer, I have my 10 people, my own family, we're working on the farm, but I'm not paying them, They're not getting paid. I might have the laborers as well working, but the labor price in each state of India varies. So that's why you see laborers from Bihar go to work in Delhi, go to work in the northern states, because laborer in Bihar gets 210 rupees per day, But the same laborer, when he goes to work in, let's say, Jammu and Kashmir, he gets around 800 per day. So that's like living in Canada for him and sending money back home in Bihar. So you cannot really put uniform MSP in, let's say, Jammu and Kashmir, where the labor rate is 800, and same MSP in, Bihar, where the labor rate is 250, because this constant, this variable A2 plus FL, it forms the component when we talk about C2 plus 50%, which the farmers are demanding, which C2 plus 50% is the government is clear. We are not willing to give you C2 plus 50%. So what is C2 component? C2 is the comprehensive cost. It also, so Swaminathan says, so it's not just the cost of pesticides, urea, seed, and labor. There's also cost of the rent of the land, So the farmer, the land of the farmer, that also has a rent. So when there's crop on it, you also got to pay some part of the rent to the farmer. Then you also got to pay some interest on it, So MSP is C2, which includes A2 plus FL, plus the rent and everything, which makes it whole, plus 50%. 50% of C2. That's the MSP farmers are demanding. And everybody who's saying MSP, we look at the data of 2017, 2018, MSP is implemented. So that data is basically based on A2. That's not even based on A2 plus FL. The farmers, if you want to keep the baseline as A2, which is the cost of pesticides, urea, and seeds and whatnot, then you can really well say, MSP is implemented. But technically, A2 plus FL, that's not happening. So it's really important to understand that technically uniform MSP regime cannot be implemented all over the country. It would be really idealistic situation to do it. But in the current era, 2020, not really possible.
Okay, no, I think what you said and what Jodh Singh said actually really helps answer that question. And to be honest, just one thing though that I think I kind of have seen as you guys have been talking about MSP is that it's almost instrumental to, it's almost kind of only part of Punjab and Haryana. So by default, then these protests are automatically tied intrinsically to Punjab and Haryana then as a result. So those people who are trying to almost argue like this is and I'm not saying it isn't a kind of a pan-Indian movement, but fundamentally this movement comes from Punjab.
Yeah, so MSP is actually not the reason that this movement is concentrated around Punjab and Haryana. People are worried about MSP in other parts as well. If you take the examples of Madhya Pradesh, then there is concerns about MSP because even the government agencies are not procuring the produce from farmers. They're not purchasing it at MSP. For example, you consider cotton, it's not procured, it's not purchased at MSP by government. But the reason only Punjab and Haryana, the government is trying to put it this way, that only Punjab and Haryana is part of the protests, and they're the only people protesting. Because yes, Punjab and Haryana are the major beneficiaries of MSP, if you look at the recent data or the old data from the times. But this said, MSP in its real sense is not even implemented in these areas. So people don't really want to go from worse to bad to worse. They're not really at what the media is trying to project. They're at the richest. They don't really want to go from poor to poorest. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, just obviously taking that a little bit further, if MSP was to be completely wiped out, and Jodh Singh obviously kind of has an inkling that it's the writing on the wall for it, what would its impact be? Would it be devastating on a social economic level?
So you have to understand why MSP was brought in, So MSP was brought in because the pharmacy size is really increasing. So I'll just give you a little data that was talking. This will really help our listeners understand why MSP is necessary and what will be the impacts if we suddenly take MSP away. And also, this said, for every honest person to be on the both sides to really acknowledge what the government policies are going to help people, it's really important to slowly improve the agriculture and then get rid of MSP, because you cannot do it right now in order to disrupt and say, oh, but this is good, just do it. That's not possible. You have to change slowly, and it will take certain time, long time for agriculture to change slowly and then implement maybe this way. So just giving you a little data here. If MSP, just imagine this hypothetically, there's this data from if MSP is implemented since 2006, 2007, right? So on 1 quintal of paddy, farmer today will be getting 119 rupees extra than what he's getting, right? So on wheat, he will be getting 550 rupees extra on what he's getting right now. So that means all the debt that farmers had, which is around 6.35 lakh crores, that the MSP would have generated 11,292 lakh crores. So all the farmer debt, which is around 6.35 lakh crores, that would have gone, if MSP had been really implemented from 2006, 2007 till now. So the purpose of MSP was to prevent suicides, dissolve the debt, and improve the farmers' lives. But that never happened. And now you're trying to get rid of it altogether suddenly. So it doesn't really make sense. The reforms do have to come in, but you need to have to connect with the farmers, look at the ground situation. Okay, so the problem of our country is that laws and ordinances, even if they are for reforms, they're passed in the AC room. There's never really ground level consultation. There's never really looked into. The sad thing is we don't even have the data of number of laborers who died, in the corona pandemic when they were marching towards their villages. We don't know that. So the government suddenly started to claim that we have the data on our outreach program for these agricultural laws. So it's really sad that these laws were not made in consultation with the farmers, and the ground situation was not assessed properly, and government thinks sitting in cozy rooms that this is going to improve. Idealistically, it will. So looking at all the economists and why they're saying it will improve, it will. On paper, it will improve everything. But on ground, that's not the case. You see the protesters there.
Okay. No, thank you for that. There are two questions in particular that I just want to bring up now. They kind of tie into one another. So the first is, what can the diaspora do? Now, I know we've seen protests from pretty much every major city across the world. What else can they do? How can we keep momentum going? What is it? Can we support financially with materials? What is it in particular? And then secondly, there's this within the media, and especially on Twitter, there's this kind of tug of war taking place in relation to Khalistan and its significance and position in relation to what's going on the ground at the moment. So I just wanted your opinions and your takes on both of those questions.
Sure. So I think one thing we as diaspora need to do, think about this again. The context that I'm seeing in terms of a broader narrative is that, people are, they're basically making, the ecosystem, right? They've been riling up people on the basis of these farmers aren't uneducated. They don't know what they're saying, this, that. I think one thing we have to do is when we speak, it's our obligation to know what we're speaking about and know what we're speaking about eloquently, right? So to that extent, talking to people in India, reading the bills, understanding it a bit better. So, like for example, there's a number going around that like 250 million people are at the border of Delhi. It's just not true. This is not like the biggest protest in world history. That number was for like this Bandh on November 26th. And even the Bandh, I checked the numbers. That was like the unions reported that, and they reported that with like full participation, which was not the case. So like even that one day Bandh, it wasn't really a thing, right? So the combined population of Punjab and Haryana, the combined overall population is 50 million. How could there be 250 million people at the border, right? So I think it's one thing we need to make sure, keep our signaling consistent, keep reading about stuff and avoid like exaggeration, avoid hyperbole. The other thing is, highlight Indian Sikh voices above all. Highlight people who are on the ground. I made a list of there's like Aman, Sial, Kamal Singh Brad, IP Singh, Punjab has just been going ham. He's been Punjab, I was going to save up, that's Punjab.
He needs some type of award. I don't know, him and Aman in particular. I haven't actually followed any of the others, but those two that we've just mentioned, I like if there was some type of like Bant Ratan award we could offer, like honestly, I just think, because the problem is, again, I might be exaggerating it, but for someone sat in the UK, it's very difficult to get unbiased news reporting from India. And so to be able to log on to your Twitter in the convenience of kind of wherever you are and just like, this is what's going on. So I think some of the first photos that started to go viral over here were from Punjab. And again, it goes to show the impact these people have.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the same. Like, I mean, if it weren't for, these, what is really, I mean, Punjab and Aman, they don't have like these concrete platforms, right? They're just kind of doing this as their hobby. And for them to just go to the protest, just take pictures, that's like adding a whole other dimension to it, and that's just like, it's amazing to see that sort of pushback to, let's say, the official media narratives, which are pushing another thing. And I think it's really important to highlight those voices. Hopefully this is, I mean, one of my bigger dreams always is, we have better diaspora India relations both ways. And this is hopefully one way to achieve that. The other thing that you were mentioning is the debate about Khalistan. I avoid discussing it in depth because at the end of the day, I do believe that the reason the like Barkhadat and all these people, they've been bringing it up so much, is to serve as a distraction. And maybe this is something we can discuss like after, like discussing, there is like definitely a Sikh driving force, right? There is definitely that. But that's why I like the 1907, analogy the best. That was simultaneously the Pagadi Sambhal Jatta movement. It was simultaneously that Pagadi Sambhal Jatta, that lyric was literally written by a Hindu Baniya. There were like non-Jats, non-Sikhs involved in the movement, even though a large thrusting force of it, that, Ajit Singh, Sardar Ajit Singh, Bhagat Singh's uncle, a large thrusting force that he highlighted was sort of, riling up Sikhs, and the Khalsa is like, go and, defend for your rights, the righteous cause. The same way we see like people, doing jekaras, we see people, distributing Sikh literature. So there is a Sikh movement. You can have Sikh movements, and you can also have, a Punjab Haryana movement. You can also have an Indian movement. It is multiple movements at once. This is all about like these mandis, the procurement system, how the legal redress. This is all the fury for the laws is all within the context of Punjab being a state within the broader Indian Union, right? Like if Punjab was like, people are like, oh, if we had our own country, this would be solved. How would it be solved? If we had our own country, right? Then you have to compete at at an international level for market produce. Then can the state even, what would the mandi system even be?
That's absolutely fair. I think you're right. This is a conversation which I think we should definitely dive into deeper at a later. My only comment to what you've put forward is that I think it also comes down to your definition of what Khalistan is, and then what Sikhi is also kind of within that system. The only reason I mention that is because a reporter in the UK had shared a photo Punjab had taken of, I think I might be wrong, but I think it's a group of Muslim men doing their prayers, and she was alluding to how this isn't a Sikh movement, and it's a this and that and whatever kind of, however she defined it as whatever movement she thought it was. And my only comment was actually, I think, because there's like this modern religious notion is that religion, and you can't be secular and religious. So the modern world has divorced the two. So you're either like church and state aren't part and parcel of one another. However, we all fundamentally know Sikhi doesn't divorce the two. Midi Pidi are combined, and that you can't take them apart. So by default, and again, I would look at movements like Banda Singh Bahadur. I'd also read Janganama for really good Punjab kind of social kind of characteristics, which is that there is a Sikh ethos or a Sikh thrust to the movement, but it's not exclusively, in a modern religious sense, a Sikh movement, in that there are Hindus, Muslims, etc., within that movement. A historical example would be how Banda Singh Bahadur's army included Hindus, Muslims from all over the place. It wasn't just, we will definitely keep this for a later podcast where we can dive into it in a bit more detail, but before doing so, I just wanted to get Aman's opinions and views on that as well.
Yeah, so I think I more or less agree with what you guys have been saying. So I think regarding the role of diaspora and how you guys can be more effective and how we can. So my point is that we really need to build on this movement. It would be really, really sad if we're able to achieve nothing after this is over. You know, let's say tomorrow this all gets resolved, hopefully for good. And if we're not able to build on this movement, we've lost. Trust me, because if we really need to. So I have a list of points that I've been talking to a lot of people from Australia. There was this one girl. She really wanted to, come back to Punjab and really make things happen. And this movement is actually, I'm really happy to see a lot of people from diaspora. They're really trying to engage at the grassroots level. So if we're not able to use this to improve diaspora Indian-Sikh relationships, this would really be sad. So I'll touch a few points here. I think there's an urgent need of an independent media house for Sikh voices in India to be, heard all across the globe, because our voices normally get lost between the right and the left of the India. And left-leaning Sikhs, you find 90% of the Sikhs more left-leaning. I'm accused of being a right-leaning Sikh in India because so this is the movement that actually defines and that actually puts all the Indian Sikhs into separate, media systems, separate media platforms, where Sikh voices are not defined and narrated by the right or the left wingers. So that would really be an achievement if we take that out of this movement. Another would be, how do we help the farmers? Okay, so this movement is done. So when are we going to talk about Punjab next? When is diaspora going to talk about Punjab next? Is it going to be in 2022? Is it going to be when another movement happens in Punjab? Is it going to be when another pharmacy side happens? No. So we want to really make on this movement, build on this movement, establish a system where people from diaspora, along with the Indian Sikhs, adopt a farmer, adopt a village. People are doing it. Adopting a village is not really a big thing. Adopting a farmer is not really a huge thing. So I'm really looking to build on this, and I'm working with some people to do it. I would be happy to encourage more people to join in on this. Send me your emails. We can discuss contracts and proposals, and we can talk about it. Adopt a farmer, talk to farmers on a daily basis. Let's have the Kisan podcast going on, talk about the farmer issues every day. People are facing issues every day. It's not just 2020, the farmers suddenly woke up. If we're constantly talking about it in the Sikh media, in the international media, highlighting it, the chances are that government will be careful on tackling it. So these two things, talking about the Khalistan thing, my words are always taken out of context whenever I talk about it. So the point is, we need to actually learn to not be apologetic about the word itself, So a lot of people, right-wingers, left-wingers, everyone uses Khalistan as a synonym of terrorist. So it's really important. My prime focus after this movement and how I want to build on this is to, let go of this demonization of this word. So if someone's calling me a Khalistani, it shouldn't be occurring as an insult to me. Educate people on it. What really it means? What does it mean? And do we really want it now? And what are we doing about it? Do we really, people talking about it really from the diaspora who really are active about it, and they want every movement to be about it. So it's really important to discuss, like you said, let's go for another podcast to discuss the blueprints about it, if any, and if it's leading to, counterproductive progress for Indian Sikhs. So Indian Sikhs need to be taken in context while diaspora is discussing the Khalistan element. That's more or less about it.
No, thank you both of you. There's 3 questions left. So the last 3 are: what are the current on the ground conditions? What are the likely next steps for the protest? And how can we I guess you guys have actually kind of touched upon this last one, which is, how can we stop this from becoming yesterday's news? How can we keep the momentum going?
So the current situations, we're still very much in the deadlock that we have with the government. Farm unions are waiting for the talk invitations from the government. Both the sides are mudslinging each other. We're ready to talk. We haven't closed the doors for talk. And farm unions haven't really received any invite as of now. We have the hunger strike today. And as of today, on 14th, we have nearly cornered Delhi from all sides. Delhi-Jaipur highway is closed, and there's protesters, a huge group coming from Rajasthan that's sitting at the borders there. We have the UP border closed. this government is trying to buy off some from unions, small fringe unions who are just going to the agriculture minister and submitting memorandums that we are in support of the bills. So its government is trying to play the tactic of farmers against the farmers. Oh, look, some farmers are in the support of bills and whatnot. So, but looking at it from the broader perspective, we have 502 unions, which are forming a consortium, and major being 32 from Punjab. So the total 40 unions that have been in talks with the union ministry and the central government, they are majorly defining the narratives, and they're majorly from some members from UP, some members from Maharashtra, Bengal. We have people majorly from Punjab. So as of today, the deadlock persists, and the agitation will be intensified. There's protests going on in Punjab all day, every day. And next steps would be to, go to the DC offices all across the country and protest there, and obviously not let BJP people, step out of their houses, surround their houses and whatnot. So the protests likely will intensify in the coming few days. And looking at the weather, December. So it's really getting colder, and the resolution needs to come up. With the festivals coming in, the Shahidis. So likely the outflow towards Delhi from the Sikh people from the north will likely move to Delhi. So there's really concern for government. That's why the barricading is increasing in all the borders. So really tough days ahead, in my opinion, yeah.
Okay, no, thank you for that. First of all, I just want to say thank you, but in particular to yourself for just making the time to do this podcast, because I think you guys are obviously really busy covering the events that are taking place. Again, I've said it a number of times throughout whilst we've been talking, but I definitely think people like yourself, Banyab, and others who are on the ground and getting the information out to us in the diaspora, I genuinely cannot thank you guys enough for that. One question that I just wanted to ask in relation to the protest currently is what could you possibly give us a rough estimate of how many people you think there are protesting at the moment?
So thank you for all that praise and whatnot, but it's really sort of seva. So looking at the numbers, there's highly exaggerated numbers put on by people. I recently put out a thread out there because the numbers are changing every day. It's really important to understand the spread of the protests. And I've been saying it constantly, that understand the spread of the protests. If you open up the map of Delhi and you look at the surrounding areas, you look at the Sonipat GT highway, Grand Trunk, Sonipat highway. So the protests or the spread is over like 20 kilometers. It's 12 to 18 kilometers. The spread starts from Kundli border. It goes up to Rasoi and Piao Manri. So it's a huge stretch. The whole highway is, jam-packed with protesters. And what we're expecting at this site is around total of around 1.25 lakh people. That would be the number on this site. And then we have another border covering from the other side of Delhi, which makes an entry from Haryana and into Delhi. That's Bahadurgarh border. So at three places there, if you again open the maps, you will find a huge stretch that goes to Sarai, Aurangabad, and then there is Naya Gaon and whatnot. So that again is a stretch of around 8 to 10 kilometers, which is covered by protesters sitting there, majorly BKU Ugraha people, a lot of ladies at the Tikri border. This is also called Tikri border, Bahadurgarh area. And that's the area where I go. Punjab normally spends his days at Kundli and Singhu. So I'm majorly concentrated on Tikri border. And this area again has around 50,000 to 70,000 people. And then we have people at Palwal, where is people from Punjab and Rajasthan together. They're around 1,000 to 2,000 people there. Then we have people at Chilla border, which is border from UP. People from UP coming in there. We again have 5,000 to 7,000 people there. And then there is some protesters who, initially on 26 and 27 were let in Delhi. And they're sitting in the Burari ground. So that number is around 1,200. So those people have not been able to come back to Singhu border or Tikri border. So those are the people sitting in the Narankari ground. So that number is really low. And that ground is really used for political gains and whatnot. People going to secure brownie points. So really less number there. So overall, the number would be around. And very important to understand that there's rotation going on. 20 people would go back from Singhu back to Punjab and bring 20 more, on a rotational basis. So there's influx of daily 500 every day. New jathas are coming in. So the number really isn't a constant anymore. So if I had to give you a specific number, it's really tough, but you can estimate it to be around 2.25 lakhs.
Yeah, that's what I had seen on some other threads and posts and comments that I'd come across. So again, it's good just to verify that with someone who's actually there. So no, thank you very much.